Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this week's Skwawk Talk on Socialist Telly. And I think it's going to be a very interesting program tonight. Certainly one I've been excited about, a discussion I've been excited about having. And there are two very special guests with us, both centred in terms of their stories, at least for tonight, around Liverpool, which is my home city. And it's Steve Howell, who is a former Jeremy Corbyn advisor, a former Deputy Strategy and Communications Director, as I understand it. And we have Peter from the UCU Union in Liverpool, who is here to tell us about what's going on there in terms of the conduct of the university towards a lot of its staff at the moment. But on the brighter side, also the fantastic solidarity, as I understand it, that is being shown by other unions and their members and by the students themselves within the university. So welcome. If you are watching, I'll do the obligatory bit. Don't forget to click on your social media, preferred social media platform, and do the notifications bit to make sure you keep up with the Socialist Telly content. And thank you very much for your time. If you're watching this on catch up, thank you for that as well. And don't forget to share the content so that people get to see what is going on and get a different perspective from what they will find on the BBC and the other media channels. So Steve and Peter, welcome. Really glad to have you here. Now, Steve, I'm going to go to you first, if that's okay. And
sure.
I read a little bit of your book that has just come out, in which you talked about your own link to Merseyside, but also your dad's experience, where simply because of working with him, one of the noted professors from the university was blacklisted in the US and had quite a carry on there. So, I mean, I would recommend that to anybody who is, interested in the period of McCarthyism, which that all links into in the 50s, but also very relevant for the time now. So, give us a quick rundown about the premise of your book, and then we can talk in a bit more detail about that particular part.
Yeah. Well, can I just clarify one thing? Well, a couple of things first. One is about the term McCarthyism, and it may seem like kind of splitting hairs, but I try not to use it. It's hard to avoid it because it is such a common, well-used term. But actually, Joseph McCarthy didn't really come on the scene. He jumped on the bandwagon of a witch hunt that was already well underway. The reason I think that's important is because the way in which conventionally the establishment has tried to portray McCarthyism is as this kind of aberration. You know, here was Zealot, this anti-communist senator who went a bit wild, but it only lasted for 4 years, and then he was discredited and censored. In actual fact, the main legislative basis of McCarthyism was the Smith Act of 1940, which was 10 years before McCarthy made his notorious Lincoln Day speech, talking about the State Department being full of Reds. And the witch hunt was really driven by J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, who were intent, realizing the threat of the rise of left-wing politics in the 1930s, were intent on destroying the left movement in its entirety. I mean, they focused particularly on the Communist Party, but it affected everybody on the left in varying degrees. And I don't think we've ever fully appreciated, I certainly, even though I knew a fair amount about it because my father's American, and as I now discover, one of the fairly big victims of it in many ways, although he didn't suffer as much as other people did because he came and exiled himself in Britain. I don't think we fully appreciated the scale of what happened in this country, because we tend to think of it in terms of the Hollywood 10, which was part of it and an important part of it, but it was only a tiny fraction of it. I mean, estimates vary, but something like I had the figure here somewhere, 12,000 people are estimated, at least that's the minimum, to actually lost their jobs through blacklisting in that witch hunt period. In terms of Smith Act prosecutions, for which you could get 20 years imprisonment, they prosecuted 132 people, convicted 105, And of that 105, they between them served 418 years in prison. And that's just the Smith Act prosecutions. That's not the prosecutions for contempt of Congress, which is the ones we often hear about. The Hollywood 10 went to prison for contempt of Congress because of the HUAC hearings that they wouldn't cooperate with. Their lawyers rather, went to prison as well. And many other people, Dashiell Hammett, the novelist and screenwriter who wrote The Maltese Falcon, he went to prison because he was treasurer of the Civil Rights Congress, and he wouldn't give the names of people who were donors to the Civil Rights Congress. So he went to prison. So there were these Smith Act people, 105 of them, who went to prison. There were all the people like the Hollywood 10 who went to prison for contempt and refusing to cooperate with congressional investigations. And then there were these 12,000 people, at least, who lost their jobs, and more names are being uncovered all the time. And one of the, I will come back to this, one of the indirect victims of it was a Liverpool University professor who had given my father a job in Liverpool when my father was looking to get out of the US to get away from the witch hunt. And I think why all this is important for us today is not just because it's history and it's important in its own right, but because what we're seeing today has so many parallels in terms of the, what we've learned about blacklisting over a very long period of trade union activists, what we know about the Shrewsbury building workers, what we know about undercover policing now and the way in which undercover police officers have penetrated organisations and disrupted those organisations in many ways, acted as agents provocateurs and so on. And we're seeing the Spy Cops Bill going through Parliament, which gives immunity to police officers who are operating underground. We're seeing the undercover, we're seeing the introduction of the police bill and all that entails in terms of restricting democratic rights and voter ID and voter suppression. So I think we're in a situation today where the emergence of a very strong left movement that emerged to elect Jeremy Corbyn and support Jeremy Corbyn over the period he was leader, but is still there and is still growing at grassroots level, despite the setback of losing the 2019 election and Jeremy no longer being leader. That left movement is still very strong, and it's given the establishment in this country the fright of its life, in the same way as the growth of a left movement in the United States was frightening the establishment in the 1930s. In my father's particular case, and cut me off if I'm going on too long, but particular case, I mean, he spent his teenage years in Berkeley in the 1930s in a fairly conservative family, but obviously he got drawn into this left-wing political movement that was taking place in a number of different ways. He was an architect and planner. He graduated as an architect from Berkeley. And he went off to Chile, first of all, with his first wife, as young people do, wanting to travel, and then got a job in an architect's department there, and again got involved with left-wing politics. And then from there, he got a job in Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico, for those who don't know, is the island colony of the United States in the Caribbean. It was colonized in 1898. And when my father arrived there in 1942, it was a hotbed of politics because there was a strong pressure for independence. And my father got involved with the independence movement. He had friends in the Communist Party, but he was at the same time working for the planning body, which was under the governor of Puerto Rico. And so his political activities had to be in his private life and had to be, he used a pen name for, in fact, two pen names, Pepe and Diego Munoz, for cartoons he did for left-wing and trade union newspapers. And this is what got him on the radar of the FBI. They wanted to know, was he this guy, Diego Munoz, and this guy, Pepe, who was doing these provocative cartoons about independence, socialism, trade union, unity, and all sorts of things. And they went to a huge amount of trouble. You know, they gathered together samples of his handwriting. They sent it off to Washington, to a lab in Washington for the handwriting experts to study. They came back saying it was inconclusive. This was around about 1945. And they even said after that, well, we need trash coverage. So they put someone on the job of surveillance of his trash in order to get more samples of his handwriting, in order to try and prove that he was this guy and he was therefore a communist. Anyway, they didn't ultimately manage to get definite proof. Had they done so, they would almost certainly at that point have started a prosecution under the Smith Act. He actually ended up coming to London in 1948, where he met my mother and split up with his first wife. And he went back to San Francisco in 1949 with the intention of bringing my mother over and settling in San Francisco. But when he realized how bad the situation was, he started looking for a job in Britain. And as luck would have it, he got a job at Liverpool University. A guy called Gordon Stevenson, who was professor in planning at Liverpool at that time, gave him this job as a lecturer on merit because of his track record and CV. In fact, he was appointed by an academic committee. And my father and mother ended up living in Wallasey. But Gordon Stevenson was in high demand internationally because he was a very high-profile academic. And he was offered a job, British guy. He was offered a job in Boston as head of the planning department at MIT. And completely unexpectedly, he'd given up his Liverpool job, he'd sold his house, his wife was American, he had 3 daughters who had dual nationality. He was all set to move to the States to take up this job, oblivious to the fact that the poor guy had hired my father, who by that stage, his first wife had, well, her psychiatrist, in fact, was very troubled. She'd gone back to Seattle. Her psychiatrist had gone to the FBI completely unethically and told them what she had told him about my father being connected to the Communist Party. So they had begun a new investigation into my father. And it was that new investigation that led to poor old Gordon Stevenson, who was not particularly political and certainly not a communist, being denied a visa to get into the United States and effectively blacklisted. And in fact, I think he got some temporary work in the States in the 1960s, but for many years he couldn't get into the States to do any work. They did eventually concede he could have a visa to go there to visit family, as long as he told them his movements and reported regularly. So they viewed him as a threat to national security. This Liverpool professor who, there's a building on the Liverpool campus named after him, the Stevenson building. But that kind of blacklisting, just by association, is the kind of thing that, you know, we've seen with trade unionists in Britain much more recently. And you know, I think we need to kind of, some of the methods may change, some of the technology may change, but the political aims of witch hunts and blacklisting remain the same, which is to divide and destroy and undermine left-wing politics and prevent any real progressive change.
Yes, and I mean, the parallels seem to be, you know, in some ways the methods maybe have become a bit more subtle, but the parallels are definitely there. So one of the things that struck me was you saying that, you know, at the point that a lot of this was happening, you know, with your dad and with this Professor Stevenson, merely being a member of the Communist Party was enough to secure a conviction of a crime against you. And yes. You know, I think we're seeing, you know, certainly, you know, on a moral sense, they're trying to equate this, you know, just normal, you know, perfectly normal kind of centre-left politics of Jeremy Corbyn's no kind of hardliner. Decent pay for nurses, you know, look after your vulnerable, that kind of thing, is constantly being classified as this hard left. And you know, I read last week that the US military now, for example, is classifying socialism as a form of terrorism, which is, you know, which is all looks like, you know, if you've got any kind of eye on history, a bit of a preamble for, you know, coming after the left and trying to you know, criminalize merely holding a set of beliefs that, you know, the right happens to disagree with. And tragically, at the moment, we're seeing you know, the right in the Labour Party eagerly kind of jumping on that bandwagon and trying everything it can to cast left-wingers as being some kind of, beyond the pale evil group that is full of bullying, etc. When in reality it's the right wing that's doing that. And the control of the media that they have in this country certainly is emboldening the establishment in whatever form, whether that's an employer like a union, etc. To be constantly pushing, constantly trying to suppress people's rights, constantly trying to push back hard-won rights that have taken a century to win. Tell us a bit more about that. How do those parallels apply in society? What do you think is the direction that's going? And Peter, I want you to jump in on this as well if you feel you have anything to say on it. Because as somebody that's a union activist, obviously you're at the sharp end of that and in the crosshairs of the establishment for trying to blunt our effectiveness and make it impossible to actually stand up to them.
Well, I think there's a serious threat to democracy in this country. I think when you, I think the establishment in this country are content with a semblance of democracy when they can be certain that both political parties are going to be on very similar policies. And we've had a period where that hasn't been the case. And I think that, as I said earlier, I think that really shook them. And so I think we're seeing, democracy eroded in a whole raft of ways. And if we're not careful, this country will be unrecognizable in 5 or 10 years' time in terms of the degree to which we're able to kind of, protest about things, pressure for things, bring about change, voter ID, as I said, undercover policing, the police bill, and so on. All these things are of concern. And I think one thing you talked about, hard left in what you were saying just now. I think one of the things that's of concern in all this is the use of language. And the term extremist, for example, has been used by Prevent in order to target people in universities who are perceived to be in some way affiliated to Islamist groups or whatever. And that term,
to be honest, that even if you're a Muslim of any kind, there's an assumption that you are somehow a terrorist, and there's this constant narrative of this association between terrorist or extremist activities and Islam, which is completely unfounded, but it's really a helpful way to demonize a group of people and blame them for things instead of acknowledging that the level of racism in society is caused by demonizing people like this. It's caused by policies of the government. They're a really handy group to pick on. And exactly right, in universities, Prevent is absolutely a racist agenda. So if you're a student from another country that happens to be predominantly Muslim, you've got to report in regularly. Your teachers are expected to grass on you if you didn't turn up to class. There are some echoes with that McCarthyist stuff that you're talking about in some of our day-to-day activities on universities, and also at the same time a movement against this from university staff that refuse to report and refuse to be jailers for these students, because we know that the vast majority of Muslim people, like the vast majority of anybody, are not terrorists. And this is just...
Can I just pick up on the back of that point about demonization as well? Because the reason... I should say, by the way, because I think this has got slightly mixed up. The factual story of my father's history, which I've told, in 4 parts on my website, has I've drawn on that, and that's informed my book Collateral Damage. But Collateral Damage itself is a novel. It's fiction, and I've deliberately moved it on in terms of time. It's set in the 1980s. And it kind of brings together both the issue, there's a backstory in it of one of the characters' father who has been a victim of McCarthyism, or FBI witch hunt, as I should prefer to say. But it's also got elements of other very contemporary aspects of the targeting and suppression of activists. But the reason I chose the central character is actually a Lebanese Palestinian who had come to London following the traumatic events of 1982 when the Israelis invaded Lebanon, the Shatila and Sabra massacre and the bombing of Beirut and all the rest of it. She's traumatized by that, She was a voluntary. The character was a voluntary teacher in one of the refugee camps, and so she's come to London to kind of get over her experiences, and she's living with an aunt in London, and she makes friends with a group of political activists in London, one of whom goes to, in 1987, a year after the airstrikes on Tripoli, goes to a peace conference in Tripoli to mark the anniversary. Her partner, Tom, and Tom is found dead on the beach in Tripoli, and she can't believe it. It's deemed to be an accident or a possible suicide. She goes over to Tripoli with a lawyer to try and get to the bottom of what happened, and she finds she's obstructed by the Foreign Office guy who's there, and she begins to smell a cover-up, and the story goes from there. But the reason, to come back to this point, the reason I wanted the central character to be a Palestinian woman was because I wanted it to be a very human story about a Palestinian character that was slightly separate from the actual Palestinian issue itself, if you see what I mean. Because I feel that the Palestinian people have been completely dehumanized by the way in which the media in this country has portrayed them. You wouldn't believe that, you know, they were a people under occupation who have suffered, you know, all they have suffered. And that human suffering never comes across in our media. Whenever they try and resist that suffering, they're portrayed as extremists and, you know, violent and all the rest of it.
I think things are changing a bit though, aren't they? Because with the recent airstrikes that Israel's been doing on Gaza and other parts of Palestine, there's been lots of protests in this country, and people who probably before had never really thought about what was going on in Palestine have got involved with that. We've seen very, very large demonstrations all around the country where people are standing up for Palestine. Doesn't mean that they're anti-Semitic or that they hate Jewish people, but they're acknowledging that Israel is an apartheid state. And this, I think, in recent weeks has been a complete shift in the mind thinking, the way people are thinking about Palestine in this country. Obviously, we only have a small influence on what happens in Israel, but obviously it matters what people think about in the big, powerful countries, and it matters that we have protests in these countries. So I think things are starting to change. I mean, I see what you're trying to do with the story that you're telling, but I think some of the things you're saying can make you feel a bit miserable or a bit depressed about things. And actually what I would say is things move to the things move to the left and then they move to the right and they can move to the left again. I would say with the Palestinian struggle, people are not taking it lying down now, and the support for the Palestinians is growing. Similarly, you know, we see, obviously we've got a very right-wing government that would love to clamp down on any lefty talk of any kind, and Jeremy Corbyn, throw him in jail or what, do you know what I mean? Because I think he's mad, crazy lefty. Of course he's a lefty, but I don't think he's a real threat to the state. I'm sure our government would love to do those things, and yet when they come out with things like the police crime bill, they're met with thousands of people protesting on the streets. People, again, who probably never thought they'd be on a demonstration, but they realise that threat to democracy, and they feel that they have to do something about it. So we're in a situation where there are some terrible stories to tell, but at the same time, there's resistance to that. The police would say, oh, we attacked that protest in London, the Women's March protest, because they were breaking COVID rules. And then when you see the footage that everybody took on their phones, you can see it was the police wading in violently, and they didn't have a good enough justification for behaving like that. So we get this narrative of these lefties are causing trouble and need to be stopped, but we also get our own experiences and the people we see and on our phones or on social media also showing quite a different story. And there's that sort of tension between what we're told to think and what we will think. And it's not all in one direction. You know, the government would love things to get worse, but there's resistance to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, I couldn't agree with you more. And if I came across like that, I didn't intend to. I mean, I think it's been inspiring to actually see the reaction of people to the Palestinian situation over the last few weeks. It's, if I'm honest, it's taken me a bit by surprise, because I think it's been, you know, I think there's always been a strong body of support and sympathy there, and solidarity. But I think it's been bigger than I realised it was. I mean, the demonstrations that we've seen all over the country have been terrific, and I think there's also been a big shift in the United States, by the way, in opinion, which I think is all to the good as well. I mean, I was in the 1980s heavily involved in the anti-apartheid movement and was secretary of local authorities against apartheid for about 5 years. And there's certainly parallels, I think, with that, the extent of public support and public opinion shifting. And that's all to the good. But I'm talking about the way in which the establishment media has demonized the Palestinian people and tried to make them out to be terrorists and simply for resisting an illegal occupation. I hope my novel is on the positive side of what you're saying, which is in the sense that it's written from the point of view of these activists who are trying to get to the bottom of their friend's death, but at the same time organizing to fight for the truth collectively, which is the key.
I think that's pretty much the point I was going to lead on to in this. I think that I think we've seen a drive back towards kind of non or extra parliamentary resistance again, because I think from 2015 to 2019, people looked at the possibility of parliamentary change under Jeremy Corbyn and got enthused about that. But now with the current Labour leadership, and I use that term loosely, saying very little about these issues, and really, the only time that Palestine, for example, ever comes up with Keir Starmer in PMQs, as far as I can tell, is that when he thinks he's going to lose the Muslim vote in Batley and Spain, he'll make some kind of vague lip service towards the idea without actually saying anything concrete about it. And yet, in the next breath, they're then demonising the Muslim men in particular in Batley and Spain by these stories about supposed kind of gangs of people chasing people around, and they're what was it, pushing people to the ground and stuff. And then when the police are confirmed they're looking at it, we'll see what happens. But it seems out of character. However, what we did see a lot of during the Corbyn leadership was Labour activists at that point getting attacked and punched in the face at the doorstep and stuff, because people were assuming that some of the horrific things that were being said on the media and by the Labour right were true, and therefore these people were scum that were turning up on your doorstep. So, but this idea of demonisation is obviously very apposite in terms of the the stuff you were writing about your dad and in your book, Steve. And it seems to me that is we're slipping back down that path, and if we don't get what worries me about the move at the moment is that I think people need to do both. It can't be, if we vacate the parliamentary resistance on the basis that the Starmerites and the worse folk have got such an iron grip on that now, there's no point. Then the government and all the rest of the establishment gets a chance to play while the cat's away, sort of thing. They do whatever they want and put things through which make actual non-parliamentary resistance, like this new policing bill, even harder. So I mean, you've been right there on facing that, working for Jeremy. What can people do? Is there hope for a Labour Party that can actually be worth having? And if so, what can people do in order to try to get there?
Well, there's always hope. But obviously, these are tough times. I mean, it's hard to swallow some of the things that are being in the name of the Labour Party at the moment. Just to wind the clock back, I mean, I think the important thing to say is that Corbynism, Jeremy Corbyn's election as leader, was born out of mass movements. The struggles against austerity, against tuition fees, the opposition to the war, if you go back a bit further, and so on. All these things fed into that sort of political change and that political upsurge that got him elected. And I think obviously then was rearguard action to win the second leadership election, and then there was 2017 election, which was in many ways the high point Corbynism at the point where, you know, we won nearly 13 million votes on a left-wing manifesto, and there was a huge mood of optimism. And where I think, and I don't say this in order to apportion blame, by the way, because I think there's too many people getting into the blame game about, you know, what went wrong. And I'm not saying those things don't need to be analysed, but I think they need to be analysed in a very sober and objective way, and to recognise that most people involved, if not everyone involved, was involved in good faith, trying to make things work. But I think, in my own view, is that at a certain point, the Brexit issue so completely took over and became so dominant that the Corbyn project kind of lost sight of, not consciously, but unconsciously lost sight of the mass movement that had given birth to it in the first place. And so the sort of mass politics that was needed to actually sustain Corbynism was almost kind of put on hold, because there was all this parliamentary shenanigans going on around Brexit that soaked up so much energy and so much time, and at the same time divided the very people who were sort of at the lead, at the head of the Corbyn movement. So I think the important thing to learn from it is that mass politics is the primary thing, that organising people, building movements, building political awareness, agitating and organising around the big issues of the day is the way in which we move forward. But that's not to say that the parliamentary aspect of it is unimportant. I think you're absolutely right, Steve, to say we shouldn't retreat from that and leave it to our enemies to, they do dominate,
Yes,
to completely monopolise it. I mean, people like Zara Sultana use Parliament brilliantly, I think, as a platform to bring up big issues that then feed into and help to kind of support and mobilise a mass movement outside Parliament. So the two things can, work very well together. And obviously Jeremy's done that for many years.
yes. I'm going to move on in a second to the situation at Liverpool University. I think Peter's just trying to correct a technical issue there at the minute. Before we do that, just tell people, one, your book, two, your dad's story, which was absolutely, what I've read of itself has been absolutely fascinating. Where can people find those and best get hold of them? As you mentioned, I think before we started the program, in terms of paperback or in electronic form as well. Well,
the factual stuff about my father's story, the connected stories of Gordon Stevenson, and actually another story I've mentioned about a guy who was a friend of my father's, who was victimised. All that is on my website, completely free of charge. There's 4 parts to it for those who are interested. I think it's an interesting story. A lot of people have said it is, so it's there and available for people to read. The novel Collateral Damage is available in bookshops. Most bookshops don't take stock of it, but you can order it through bookshops. You can order it online through all the usual channels, Waterson's, dare I say it, Amazon, etc. On my own website, I've got it on sale. There's a PayPal facility. You can use credit card. That's actually the best option for me, to be honest. And it's also a good price because it's only £10, including postage. And in terms of the ebook, you don't have to buy the Kindle that's on Amazon. You can go to a Welsh Book Council website where there's an ebook. It's called Folio, the website, FFOLIO. And it's part publicly funded. It's not for profit, and that ebook is there if you want an alternative to Amazon. So for $3.99, it's and the retail price is $8.99. So if you order it in the bookshop, that's actually is the cheapest option for you.
Super. So I'll put that up there at the bottom. I'll leave that on for a few minutes while we move the discussion on. Have a feeling we're going to come back full circle by the end of the program, however. But Peter, give us the rundown, please, as to what this dispute has been and what it's become at Liverpool University.
Sure, Will. Thanks very much for inviting me. And sorry about my internet connection. I'm sure if we had got Jeremy Corbyn into power, everybody would have better broadband. That was one of his claims, wasn't it? Okay, so I'm one of hundreds of members of UCU who's been on strike against job cuts at the University of Liverpool. So UCU is the University and College Union that represents researchers, lecturers, and some of the administrators at universities around the country. So earlier this year, what happened at the university, they proposed 47 job cuts in health and life sciences. That include excellent teachers, people who've won teaching awards recently, some teachers who've been working for 25 years at the university and are really highly acclaimed by their students. They're on the list to go, and also a number of excellent researchers, people who are doing vital research on health issues in Merseyside and are specialists in some of the Merseyside health concerns that we've got. Also working on COVID, of course, because none of our health and life science staff have been able to avoid working on COVID this last year. Doesn't matter, the university didn't care, put 47 people on the list for redundancy during the pandemic earlier this year. So initially the university said the cuts they weren't about saving money, no. These cuts were about reshaping the faculty so that we're better able to serve the community's needs, health needs. They were already doing that. So this didn't make a lot of sense. Logically, it was rubbish. Now they're saying, today the Vice-Chancellor, our boss of the university, said, oh, it's because we need to save some money. That's why we're making these job cuts. We're one of the richest universities in the country, and our Vice-Chancellor gets £410,000 a year. That's more than £1,000 a day, including bank holidays and weekends, plus lots of benefits, free house, free car, all that kind of stuff. If we're really short of money, why is she getting so much money and we need to get rid of 47 brilliant teachers and researchers? The logic is absolutely rubbish. Now, the university justified the cuts. They said, we've picked the 47 worst performing members of staff to get rid of, and they use research metrics, so different ways of measuring the quality of research to select those 47 people. But actually none of the research metrics were appropriately used. They're not supposed to be designed to pick on individuals and say you're not good enough. You're certainly also not supposed to come up with a list of rules for performance without negotiating with the university, with the unions first over it. So everything about how they've gone around this has been wrong. It's also clear that these staff aren't really redundant. They're really, really needed. Their courses are going to be cut next year if they're not teaching, and that means students will get a much worse education. They're not really redundant. And I think one of the main aims the university had in making these redundancies was to test the waters with the staff. Will the staff fight against these cuts? If not, we can go for even more. They're testing the union, they're testing how well organised we are, and they're testing whether we're able to fight back in a pandemic. And I think the response from our union, from UCU, has been, yes, we will fight back, absolutely, definitely. So we had a ballot. We have a consultative ballot first, but then we had the formal industrial ballot. 84% of the members in our union voted for strike action. Now, most of us aren't affected by these redundancies at all. I'm not in that faculty. Most of us who voted for strike action are not going to lose our jobs through this. But what we knew very clearly early on was that if the university gets away with cutting these jobs, definitely more will follow. Their appetite for cuts will grow, it won't diminish. Since we had our industrial action ballots, the government has then announced 50% cut for arts funding. So subjects like history and English, archaeology, my subject, they want to cut those because they cost a lot of money and they're not really that important. Because, you know, nobody comes to this country for the history or the music or the archaeology or the culture. Anyway, it's a load of rubbish, the government's arguments. But what it does say to us is we're absolutely right to stand by these members of staff, because the universities will come for us next as well. So what we did, we started with 2 weeks of action short of a strike, ASOS. That was working to contract. Bear in mind, a lot of people, especially lecturers, they get paid for 37.5 hours work a week, but often will do 50 or 60 hours a week for no extra money. So actually working to contract would have made an impact straight away. But after the 2 weeks of that, we went on strike. So it was 3 solid weeks of strike through the end of May and the beginning of June. And that was really solid. It was very, very good. And that included administrators and lecturers and researchers. As I say, lots of people who weren't actually going to lose their jobs went on strike over this. When we were doing the action short of the strike, the university reduced the number of redundancies from 47 to 32. So they were clearly shaken by the working to contract and worried about the strike action. When we took the 3-week strike action, the university reduced the number of redundancies again down to 25. So it's clear to me that taking the strike really does make a difference. During the strike, what we did, we had strike meetings online every day. We had small pickets on campus. We weren't able to get hundreds of people on campus because of, well, we're living in a pandemic. Let's not be stupid about it. But we still had small pickets on campus every day. We had physical protests on campus each week, and lots of online rallies and opportunities for people to get involved, and lots of other creative ways of keeping our members involved in the strike. definitely being on strike under a pandemic is different from what it used to be in the before days. I'm not sure what you call that, pre-pandemic days before. Anyway, but some things are definitely the same. So making sure that your union members are involved in the decision making by having daily meetings, making sure that there are events and activities for members to take part in so that they feel connected to the strike. This really matters if you're working from home and then you're striking from home and you could be sitting just in front of a little computer screen going, should I do some work or not? If you have events and activities that keep your members involved, it means that strike stays really alive. So we were having online meetings of a couple hundred people every day. Other things that really matter, building solidarity from other trade unionists has been fundamental to our strike. We've had hundreds of messages of solidarity, thousands of pounds in donations, because look, we're losing 3 weeks strike pay, but since then more people have been taking action and are going to lose even more. I'll go on to that. So that those donations give people who are on strike or fighting back that confidence and that sense we're not doing this on our own and we're not going to be starved back to work, or we're not going to be starved into giving up on this dispute. So that solidarity from other trade unionists has been absolutely fundamental. Now, before the end of the strike, we had another vote in our branch and we decided that we would then continue with the marking and assessment boycott. So this just is about the teaching staff, and this is the time of year when students normally get their results. So they decided not to do the marking and not to do all the different sorts of assessment around quality of courses and stuff. It's difficult because it's a limited group of people rather than the whole union, but they've been absolutely solid on this. And it's clear that marking and assessment boycotts can have a real impact on universities because they're really only interested in churning out students with degrees. So it hits them where it really hurts. Again, though, staff from all different faculties are taking part in the action. So even though it's health scientists who are losing their jobs, there's archaeologists, language teachers, lecturers in politics, law, and so on. They're all not doing their marking and standing by these people because we know we've really got to stop these cuts. They're going to come for more stuff, more cuts if we let these go through. Since the marking boycott started, which I think was the 14th of June, the universities reduced the redundancies again to 22. So we've saved 25 jobs. And I'll tell you what, if we hadn't taken any action, those people, all 47 would be on the dole by now. That would be 47 lives ruined. So I'm really proud and pleased that we've taken this action. But we've also voted that we were going to fight again. We're going to go on strike again. So we've got the marking boycott for the time being. We hope to be on strike again in August because we're really committed to saying no redundancies are acceptable. We want that number to be 0. And again, I would just say the solidarity is the thing that's making a big difference. It's really motivating our members. But a lot of support from trade unionists, lots of solidarity from our local Labour MPs. Somebody suggested trying to contact the Tory MPs, but we haven't really got any in Liverpool. And there are a few a bit further away, but we're not going to really get much support from them. So forget that. We've got lots of online protests and physical protests coming. So the next online meeting is on the 5th of July. We're going to have a protest in town, hopefully around the 10th of July. So we'll keep people informed about that. Fundamental to this dispute as well, though, has been solidarity from students. Now think about our students. They've had a really hard time over this last academic year. Started last summer with a rubbish A-level results fiasco. The government saying, we'll do this. Oh, no, we'll do that. Teachers were doing their best, but students were really messed about. There was absolute chaos over A-level results. Then they got lured to campus by universities saying, don't worry, it'll be business as usual. We'll have a great time. It'll be lovely. Actually, they got locked in student halls, charged an exorbitant amount of money for hall fees, and probably lots of them got COVID because they were trapped in little cubicles with others. They've had rubbish time there. They've not got the student experience that they were promised, even though our staff work themselves silly to try and provide alternative means of education for them. So our students have been really mucked about, but their solidarity for our dispute has been absolutely amazing. So they've had a couple of different protests on campus. The most recent one was Thursday just gone, a big lively protest on campus, and they're very clear. They're not blaming us for disrupting things. They're blaming our university bosses who've got a very clear choice. If they want to not disrupt things for students, get the marks out on time and do all that stuff, they can just stop these redundancies straight away. It's up to them to do that now. So the student solidarity has been great. We've had the president and others from the student guild speaking at our protest, and they took the knee with us when we had a George Floyd Memorial Day during the strike. The students speak on our demonstrations and explain the support they're getting from staff isn't just the educational support, but also that, you know, as I said, they've had a very hard time, the students, and that pastoral care, that support the students have received from staff in other ways has been really fundamental this year. So then students talking about that really shows that there is a meaningful understanding. The students know what the problem is, and they know that cuts to our staffing is going to make their education worse, so they know where to point the finger. Now, just to finish off, I would say some people would argue that going on strike is really old-fashioned. It's not necessary. It's not useful anymore. But as I said before, if we hadn't have fought back, 47 people would have lost their jobs, and it's not an easy time to get a job in education at the moment. There are no permanent jobs and very few even temporary jobs that are worth having. That's 47 families who would have been really stuffed at the moment. Taking strike action, fighting back really does work. We've already saved more than half the jobs, and that solidarity from other people has made a huge difference to the confidence of our members to keep on fighting. So I am going to stop going on because I know we want to have more of a discussion than just me ranting at the thing. But I just want to say thank you for solidarity.
It's brilliant to hear all that, and certainly an eye opener. I mean, a couple of things that leap out at me, kind of, right up at the front, really. Health and life sciences getting cut in the middle of a pandemic. I mean,
it makes no sense.
It's not like it's some peripheral, I don't know, study of some obscure, esoteric thing that nobody's ever heard of. But this is health and life sciences.
Yeah.
We need vaccines, we need nurses, we need doctors, we need, those are exactly the things that at the moment should be,
there
the
are
absolute
kinds
premium.
of cancer that are very prevalent in Merseyside, and our researchers work on that. As if we don't need to worry about cancer anymore. Let's get rid of them. It makes no rational sense. No, if universities were run in the best interests of the community and the public, they wouldn't make these cuts. But they run like businesses, and they just go, "You cost money. Let's get rid of you. We can spend our money on some other."
I mean, the other thing linked to that really is the fact that they've chosen Liverpool to do this in, to begin with as well, because it doesn't strike me as being the easiest of places to try to force through those kind of cuts, because it's got this, solidarity and unwillingness to take any shit, basically, that's kind of built into its DNA.
We do stand in a long tradition of fighting back.
That's the testbed. If we can do it here, then we can do it pretty much anywhere we like. So let's see if we can win on the toughest one first, and then we'll pick the easy fruit afterwards.
You're absolutely right. Lots of cuts have been attempted, but university bosses around the country are definitely watching what happens at Liverpool. And if we go down, our university bosses in other places will know they've got the confidence to fight others and to make more cuts. So it's absolutely essential that we win at Liverpool, because we need to send out that message that fighting back can be successful. We don't have to take these cuts. It really matters. Really matters.
Steve, you were trying to come in there?
Well, I was just going to say, these people who say that striking is sort of going on strike is old-fashioned and out of date. I mean, what do they offer as an alternative to fight back? I mean, I know there are obviously some other tactics, but they're not mutually exclusive anyway. So what are they arguing? Do nothing, or?
Well, we've written angry letters, we've signed petitions, we've asked nicely, we've taken the university's research metrics approach, and with a fine-tooth comb gone through it and said, that's not right, this is wrong, you forgot this bit, you're using this wrongly, and explained logically. None of this matters. I think that is why I am convinced that part of the university's rationale is they just want to take on the union and see if they can break us. Because if they can break us on this, then they can come for lots and lots of other attacks and cuts. Yeah. And I think that's part of the rationale, because there's no logic in cutting these jobs. Some of the people who would be made redundant.
We're in such abnormal times. You can't judge what's needed in terms of staffing and funding for universities in such an abnormal situation. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, even from any kind of rational management point of view, never mind anything else. I mean, it is obviously designed to kind of to attack the union and to see how far they can push. You often, over many years, we've seen this many times, haven't we, where they test things out. They see, they push to see what reaction they get, and then if they think that they can push further, then they push further. And I think you're absolutely right. The earlier you mount resistance to that, then the more chance you've got of ultimately winning, rather than allow yourself to be constantly pushed back and pushed back. I mean, one thing that strikes me about the present situation is the way in which organising methods have been affected by it. And I noticed earlier in the year when the teachers' union, the National Education Union, was organising around the issue of the schools going back in January. And one Sunday, I think it was the first Sunday in the year actually, they had an online meeting for their members. And I think I'm right in saying it was over 50,000 people who took part in this online meeting. Now, in terms of participation...
Yeah, and you know what, those meetings were absolutely critical, because it was the National Union calling those meetings and allowing everybody to attend them and everybody to speak and say, we're scared about what's going to happen. We want to stop the schools opening. And they effectively shut down schools in January because they did that. I'm a bit frustrated that UCU, my national union, didn't do the same thing. It could easily have called a similar sort of meeting and said, look, it was a crazy idea to invite students from all over the country to all swap places and go live in different cities at a time when, in September, when the COVID rates were going up again, the schools had just opened, rates were going up. Let's get thousands of students and mix them all around. It was crazy to do that. And what happened was the COVID rates shot up, as the union had been predicting for quite some time that would happen. I'm frustrated that our national union didn't draw us together as a whole national union. So there's been a series of different strikes and different attempts to fight back over health and safety and other issues, but branch by branch. So at the moment, there are 49 prison education branches of UCU all going on strike over health and safety. We should be acting as a whole union together over these same issues, and it would have been much more effective that way. Instead, we're fighting one at a time, but the solidarity between branches is what's making a big difference. But yeah, you're right, we've had to use Zoom. Nobody knew what Zoom was a year and a half ago, and now everybody who works in the university in any capacity knows what Zoom is. We use Microsoft Teams. WhatsApp has been absolutely crucial to our strike, because we have a WhatsApp group for the strike every day that is constantly people sharing messages. I said this to my boss, you can share the same message and send it to them, or how do you respond when this happens? These are things we never would have thought of in the past. I've been a trade union rep for a very long time, and the thought of using mobile phones in this way hadn't occurred to us really until this year, and now phones and the internet have been absolutely crucial to it. Like I said before, aspects of the strike and the dispute are very familiar to people who've been around unions for a long time. Withdrawing your labour, standing together shoulder by shoulder is absolutely what it's all about. But if you can use these other technologies to facilitate that, well, do it. Brilliant. It's made such a big difference. So yeah, we've all got Zoom accounts.
It's all about organising, isn't it? Finding the right methods to communicate and organise on as big a scale as you possibly can. I mean, I still don't think there's anything to beat face-to-face discussions and, demonstrations like the People's Assembly one that we had in London, the Palestinian march we saw in May, and so on, where people are physically together in a big protest like that. But this is something that adds another dimension to it and adds another tool and avenue that can be used. And in those situations where you can't bring everyone together, where you want to reach people like the NEU did on a national scale, all at the same time, then it's absolutely brilliant. And it must have the establishment quaking in their boots.
I'm sure it does, because the NEU recruited 18,000 new reps in that weekend alone. After they had that meeting, they recruited 18,000 new reps. So I'm sure our management of our different institutions does worry about it when we find effective ways of bringing people together, because they sent us all home, work from home during the pandemic. We've been doing that. It would have been very easy to be isolated and alone and thinking, am I the only person on strike in my department? I don't know what's going on. And for our industrial action to have been weakened, but because we use these different techniques, we're able to keep people together. And if you have a Zoom meeting with 400 people in it, full well you're not the only one taking action. It makes a difference. We have to be creative. It's not about saying old trade union methods are no use anymore. Actually, the same methods are required. We just have to be creative about working with the situation that we're in, and pulling those people together and making sure members are the ones choosing what happens to our dispute, what action we take next, has been really crucial. And thank you to Zoom for facilitating that. Well, in fact, thank you to the University of Liverpool for paying for our Zoom accounts and not realising what devious things we were doing with them.
Careful.
Don't tell anybody that.
I think I said at the start of this section that we'd probably end up coming back full circle, and I think we probably are, because we've talked a little bit already about the fact that this policing bill is coming back to Parliament now. And you've got a thing on your chair or your shelf there behind you, Peter, saying picket supervisor. And, you know, we're not very far away from any kind of picket, for example, you know, simply being deemed annoying by the, by whoever. And then, you know, they will do everything they can to treat that as a criminal enterprise. And they've got there by demonizing resistance in various forms already. And then trying to lump everything together so that even, you know, totally legitimate practice, it will lead on to the next assault on union rights and union activism for sure.
I absolutely agree with you. They might have started by picking on XR, but they'll definitely use it to stop trade unionists fighting back. There's no question about it. That's why our union branch passed a motion supporting campaigns against, well, the Kill Bill campaigns against the police and crime bill. It's absolutely a trade union issue. Absolutely. We have to stand up against this stuff. Otherwise, we're not in a democracy anymore.
Yes, 100%. So I think we're getting towards. Are you writing something down there, Steve, to show us?
Well, I just wanted to give you a quote from Gordon Stevenson, because I think one thing the establishment always uses, the ruling class always use against us, is fear. It's fear of losing your job, fear for your family, fear of being outcast. And that's what the witch hunt was all about. It was about creating an atmosphere of fear to such an extent where people were stabbing each other in the back, which is very sad to see, but it did happen in that witch hunt period, that people were stabbing each other in the back, going to the FBI, or in the case of a trade union struggle, people stabbing, as we saw in the miners' strike or whatever. And I read Gordon Stevenson's letters when I was doing the research for this, and he wasn't a political animal. He wasn't, particularly left-wing or anything. But he wrote one letter where he said he urged an academic in the United States not to let fear come into your thoughts. There are evil men in the world who are relying on the minds of others to be sickened by fear. The technique failed in 1939. I've no regrets for anything I've done, good, bad, or indifferent. And even though upset, I certainly refuse to be frightened. And I thought that was a very kind of powerful thing for somebody who's not a political animal, a political activist, to say, to stand on that ground of saying, I refuse to be frightened. I'm not going to let you put fear into my mind, whether it's about, victimization and blacklisting or fighting for your job, or any other issue for that matter. And we have to stand together against that kind of atmosphere of fear in society, because that's what the enemies of progress want to engender. They want to make us run for cover. They wanted to do that when Jeremy was leader. They wanted people to disassociate themselves and distance themselves from him by attacking him. They made other people worry, other people in politics, for example, in Parliament, worry for their careers and want to distance themselves. It's the way they divide us and the way they scare some people into being passive and keeping their heads down. And the only way to combat it is collectively to gain that strength through solidarity and collective action that an organisation can create, so that people don't feel that they're on their own.
Yes, I think that's a good note to wind up on, and we'll finish pretty much on time tonight. I do just want to draw
good luck to you, Peter. Good luck to you.
I do just want to draw everybody's attention to the scrolling text and the fixed text there at the bottom. So a little message there about how you can, support the strike in other terms, and obviously a donation link as well. Support the strikers and make sure that they can, etc. And I'm going to pop up as well, just one more time, Steve's stevehowell.com. Whoops, where's that gone? There we are, stevehowell.com. And people can see, that's where to find it if you want to order the physical version of the book, I understand. And then obviously preferred supplier, non-profit, is called Folio with 2 Fs, Welsh word, if you want to look it up. And you'll be able to order the e-version of the book from there. I'm going to be doing that next. and get yourself to Steve's site as well to read this very interesting 4-part story about his dad. And, you know, but primary message, solidarity with the people involved in industrial action anywhere. Absolutely essential that the movement sticks together and gives everybody every support that they can manage. And, you know, that we fight on every front available against all of the things that are being done to try and take away our rights in various forms at the moment. So I do thank my guests for giving us their time this week. Thank you to everybody who's watched already. And if you're watching on catch up and seeing this, then again, thank you for that. Do share and do the clickety bits to make sure that you get notified whenever anything new comes out on Socialist Telly, because getting out the message in one form or another is more essential than ever. So thank you very much for that, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the week and keep an eye out for what else is coming next. Take care, folks.
Thanks very much.